So now we're ready for slab number 2. I have a smaller piece of clay here because my D is not as large as my main tile piece. So I'm going to go ahead and roll this out just like I did before. I'll kind of use my palm to get it started and to even it out if it's, you know, really lopsided. It was a little bit lopsided there. So picking it up, rotating, flipping, applying even pressure. Whether you're using a rolling pin or any other cylindrical object to roll, it's always helpful to stand, because when your body is above the clay and above your work surface, you'll get much more even pressure, as opposed to when you're sitting down. You will have more pressure close to your body and less pressure further away from your body. So this is looking pretty good. Didn't have to roll it too much. And I think we are good to go. So for the letter D, I am going to take my design and I'm going to lay it on top, and I'm going to trace it with a kind of dull pencil here, so that way I can get an impression on the clay that I can then carve out. If I wanted to do the marker method, I would have to make sure that I trace the reverse and then transfer that. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of, you can use a pen or a dull pencil to do this. Be careful not to tear your paper. It's just enough so you can see it. We're not cutting it. We're just leaving a little mark. Okay, and then I'll do the inside. Just a little bit of pressure. Okay, so now I can see my D, it's right there. And I'm going to use my needle tool. Now, when cutting out your pieces, it's really important that we're trying to go in as vertically as possible, so that way we're not getting a really kind of harsh angle cut. So I'm gonna actually rotate this. So I'm dragging the needle tool towards my body because that feels more natural for me. So I'm going to try to go, and you can do this in multiple passes. So I'm gonna just gently carve. I'm not cutting all the way through. And then go back and make a second pass. It's much easier to make multiple passes to get clean cuts. So I'm gonna go ahead and move my clay as I work around. So a gentle pass, kind of halfway through, and then a second pass all the way through. I'm gonna go all the way out so I can cut and exit, so I can remove and save those pieces. I'll use them very soon. And then I can go straight down here and get my sides. If you feel like it's really just too squishy and you're not getting clean cuts, you can go ahead and let your slab just kind of firm up a little bit after you roll it out. Come back to it maybe 10-15 minutes and then give it some cuts. It'll absolutely cut more easily and more crisp if it's set up for a little bit. My clay isn't too sticky, so it's not bad. I think it's going okay. So I'll cut out my inside. Again, you can absolutely use your ruler as a guide for any straight edges you have in your letters of your design. So my first pass, and now my second pass. And I think we're through. Perfect. Okay, So again, I'm gonna save all these little slab pieces because they are going to be awesome. I'm gonna use them to cut out kind of my flower petals and other things that I will add to my design. But here we are with my D and my main slab. And what I'm going to do is my next step will be kind of laying out the border of my main slab and my letter D and then attaching them. So I'm gonna prepare to draw out my border in my next step. So here we are. I've just taken my slab tile main piece and my slab D out of a Ziploc bag that I was keeping them stored in so that they would stay nice and soft. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to mark the border, the interior border of my slab tile before I attach my D because I want to make sure I have the positioning correct. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my template back on top. I'm going to scooch my water so I don't spill and just line that up using my ruler. I'm just going to make an indentation as to where that border is. So it doesn't take much pressure, just kind of lightly marking that space. You can kind of do the whole thing or you can work around your design. Doesn't really matter because it's a very gentle impression, so you can make it disappear later if you need to. So I think I'm gonna do the whole border just visually so that I can see that I'm centering my D in the design. So if it wasn't perfectly centered in your sketch, now is a really good time to adjust it and center it. Okay, so great. Now I have a nice impression of the interior border. I kind of poked through my paper a little bit, but that is okay. So my next step is going to be attaching my D, and I'm going to attach my D and smooth it out kind of in the same step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to position it where I like it. So I might even do a little bit of measuring. So I'm about 1 inch from the top and 1 inch from the bottom. Great. I'm going to kind of try to make sure that I have the same distance between the edges as well, just to kind of keep things uniform. And what I'll do is with my needle tool, I will very lightly actually trace where my letter goes, so I know exactly where to score when I go to attach it. So just very gently drawing out where I'm gonna score, kind of very gently lifting it. I'll actually just flip it so I'm ready to score the back side as well. Using my needle tool, I'll go in and score this whole area where they will connect. So I like to go in one direction and then the other direction to make sure I'm really getting a nice surface. Think of it like Velcro, right? We need to connect the grooves. And when we attach, we're going to agitate as well. So even the small edges here, we want to make sure we get all of it. Trying to stay within the boundaries so that we don't have too much cleaning up to do. Okay, and then I'll do the same on the back of my letter here, and I'm gonna be a little bit more careful and kind of hold it gently on these thin areas so I'm not distorting the shape. So still scoring, just being a little bit more careful about how I handle it, a little bit more gentle. Okay, so both directions, don't be shy. Awesome. Now I'm gonna grab my paintbrush to make my work a little bit easier and grab that water. And I'm just gonna kind of work the water into that scored area. We would use slip or water, kind of creating slip on the tile. It's okay if it gets a little bit messy because we're gonna clean it up. We wanna make sure that this joint is really strong. Even though it's a tile and it's flat, it doesn't seem like it would be that big of a deal. It could very easily pop up. So I'm gonna do the same on my cutout letter, get some water on there to prepare for the connection. Okay, so now I'm going to flip and line up my letter. Once it is in position and I don't see any kind of score marks hanging out, I'll begin to press, kind of even pressure. So I want to be firm, but I don't want to squash my letter. So it's kind of a nice bit of pressure. You should see the water kind of seeping out. Give it a little bit of a wiggle even. You're kind of agitating those joints, really forces those connections. So agitation is key to strong joints. I can even hear like a little squish. So you want to apply pressure until you don't see that kind of squishing out anymore, because you also don't want to be creating any air bubbles in between those connection areas. So, and if it gets a little bit out of shape, that's okay, because we're going to clean it up next and it'll get back to where it needs to be. So that is our next step. I'm going to spend a good amount of time with a gentle touch smoothing all of these harsh cuts that we've just made. So I'm going to use not only my finger, I like to use the paintbrush as well to get into these grooves, to smooth things out. I'll grab my sponge, and it really just gives a much cleaner look, a much more finished look. And it's helpful to do it now before we add our other elements, because things are going to get kind of tight and crowded in some areas of the design. So we can really, we don't have to worry about, you know, bumping into other features, and we don't want it to dry out to the point where it would be difficult to clean it up. So I'm going to spend some good time really cleaning up, softening the edges, making sure if there was any score marks that were exposed underneath that I'm smoothing those out as well. And I'm also going to smooth, just very gently smooth the sharp edges of the exterior slab. So I'm just gonna give it a light touch just so it doesn't have that harsh edge or have any clay burrs kind of sticking up. So I'll continue to clean this all up before I start cutting out my additional design elements. If you want, you can even take your sponge and actually cut a section of it off, or if you happen to have kind of like triangle makeup brushes, they make for really good angles to get into small places. So you can definitely create a sponge tool that really works better for small details and spaces. So that's a trick and a tip from me to you.